Well, we're going to have somewhat of a conversation because I want you to ask questions and answer questions as we go along. What I'm getting at with this talk is the very simple notion that if God is who the manifestations claim him to be, that he is not only a God of altruistic love, but he is also logical. And if he is logical, then his plan for us and creation is logical. And if it is logical, then we should be able to discern in that plan and in all the teachings the logic underlying that plan. Furthermore, there should not be any logical inconsistencies within the teachings. So if you find something in the writings that disagree with something else in the writings, it is you who are in error, not the writings. Furthermore, there are many paradoxes in the writings, or ostensible paradoxes, enigmas, whatever you want to call them. And we're going to look at a few of them tonight, so you can see that one of the main errors we commit when we think we have found something disturbing, insofar as a conflict, or something that doesn't seem appropriate to God, something God is doing that we think, well, if I were God, I would do that better. I would be more loving than that. I wouldn't make someone fall into the nethermost fire at the last moment of their lives simply because they have a few doubts. That doesn't sound like something I would do if I were God. Well, you can be pretty sure once you have become aware of God through your daily conversations with God, through his manifestation, or become aware of the nature of God through the teachings and actions of the manifestation, the two most prominent means by which we know God directly, then if you find something in the writings that disturbs you, that gives you even a sense of doubt or caution or concern, don't just stick it inside and let it dwell there. It is your job to investigate, because the mystery of religion is not meant to be enigmatic or paradoxical. The mystery is that God loves us as much as he does, but there's nothing mysterious about the way he works. He is logical and his system is logical. So we're going to test a few of these, we're going to test this overall premise with which we begin by looking at some things that frequently cause Baha'is, or people who are studying the Baha'i faith, trouble. And you think, well, I don't understand why on the one hand he says this, on the other hand he says that. So we'll look at a couple of things, such as free will in the afterlife. Do we have free will in the afterlife? Such as whether or not when we enter the presence of God, how can we enter the presence of something that has no presence? God is non-physical. So what does he mean by that? Well, there's got to be a logical answer, right? If God is logical, and if the faith is logical, and if the writings are consistent within themselves. So we begin with one particular cautionary rule that should guide all of your studies, and that is, you cannot take a single passage out of context and hold on to that as meaning something by itself. That all of the statements in the writings are in a context. So if you take one passage and say, well, look, it says this, and then someone else will say, well, look, I found this passage that contradicts it and says this. So not only is each statement within a context, a larger context, but the ultimate context is the whole revelation, because the whole revelation is one thing. It has a beginning, it has a middle, a climax, and it has an end. And so every passage is within a context not only of the tablet in which it occurs, but within the whole revelation of Baha'u'llah. Now, how many people, well, here, let's do this first. Let's just not assume anything and go over some basics. What is the Baha'i faith? The basic beliefs are a world religion founded in 1844, the second most widespread religion in the world. It affirms, I'm going to have to look here because I've got on my reading glasses here. It affirms that there is one God who created all that exists. Everything, whether it's physical or non-physical, everything. We believe that all the world's revealed religions are stages of a single coherent educational process that God has devised for human enlightenment. That's very important. Now that's on planet Earth, but we presume this is occurring on other planets as well, the same process. It is only logical. We believe that God is loving, forgiving, logical, and purposeful in everything he does. Nothing he does is illogical, therefore nothing he does is capricious. Now what does capricious mean? Whimsical without just because he felt like it. Arbitrary, or even perhaps out of some ignoble motive, like jealousy or wrath or something like this. Some of the images of God we get from the Old Testament, which is written down by scribes after the historical fact with a process that we can discuss later if we need to. We assert that because God is entirely spiritual in his essential nature, he sends emissaries, messengers, in human guise to portray his attributes, to teach us how to perfect our own capacities and to guide human history towards its ultimate goal, which is the establishment of global peace, arrived at through the emergence of a world commonwealth governed according to spiritual principles. The world center, of course, is on Mount Carmel. There's the House of Justice, the center of the source of the guidance for the Baha'i faith and for all humankind, we're told. Freed from all error, source of all good. Paradox, mysteries, enigmas in the faith, then, are not something we worship. So we don't say that something that is enigmatic, oh, it's too mysterious. We shouldn't talk about this or discuss this. No, in the faith, in this religion, unlike some religions where mysteries are adored as mysteries and you don't try to conjoin science or scientific method and religion, because the two are use entirely different methods. One you believe in faith, and the other you believe because of empirical investigation. No, in the faith, mysteries are not to be worshipped, but resolved. And you may not resolve all of them in one night or in one lifetime, but we are fortunate that Baha'u'llah has assured us that we live eternally, and we have an infinite amount of time to understand them or get to know them. God has endowed man with intelligence and reason, whereby he is required to determine the verity of questions and propositions. If religious beliefs and opinions are found contrary to the standards of science, they are mere superstition and imaginations. For the antithesis of knowledge is ignorance, and the child of ignorance is superstition. Unquestionably, there must be agreement between true religion and science. If a question be found contrary to reason, faith and belief in it are impossible, and there is no outcome but wavering and vacillation. If a question is found contrary to reason. So that's what we're working with tonight. So we want to look at a series of what a Baha'i once, a friend of mine once said, are delicious paradoxes in the Baha'i teachings. I'm going to put on my other glasses, see if I can see better with those. Oh, yes, that's very nice. Well, we'll do one together. What is a syllogism? Well, a syllogism is a logical tool we use to get at very simple logical problems. So we take as a major premise, God is logical and perfect. Since God is logical and perfect, the system he creates must likewise be logical and perfect. It has to be, right? You can't have a perfect creator creating something that's imperfect. It doesn't make any sense. It was for that reason that the theosophists in the 19th century determined, and along with the Christian scientists, that there must not be a physical reality, because physical reality, by definition, falls apart. It's composite. It's imperfect. Minor premise. There are apparent contradictions among the statements in the writings. Conclusion. Therefore, all apparent contradictions are misunderstandings on our part. Now, I already did this one for you just a few minutes ago, but here you see it spelled out as a logical argument. If this is true and this is true, then this must follow. That's how you work. That's how we figure them out. So let's do a few. Clues to solving these mysteries. Literal versus figurative or symbolic. One of the most injurious processes in previous religions insofar as getting confused about the logic of God and his methods is taking that which is meant to be symbolic as literal. So when Christ says, "You who have seen me have seen God," the patristic fathers of the church a few hundred years later decided, he said, if we see him, we see God. He's got to be God. And so they decided Christ was God, and that was that. And since Christ was the only messenger who was God, then all the other messengers must be lesser or different from or not particularly important or leading up to Christ, and everything after Christ had to be blasphemy or apostasy. The same way that Muhammad says, "I am but a man like you, but I am a prophet, and I am the seal of the prophets, the last of the prophets." You take that literally, no more prophets. All right? So what does he mean by that? Well, that's one of the major things you have to watch out for. You can't take a statement out of context. I just mentioned that before. And we'll see a couple of those in a minute, where we see that Baha'is do the same thing. We're not immune to any of these processes. Just because we have the writings doesn't mean we know how to read them or understand them. Since God is logical, purposeful, and smart, there must be a logical solution. Human purpose. All right, here comes an easy one for you. I'm sure you can get this. Here's the major premise. I bear witness, O my God, that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee. Right? Two things we're supposed to do. And the means by which we do this are spelled out in the preamble of the first paragraph of the Agdas. How do we learn to know and to worship God? What does that mean? Translated in the terms of the law, the book of laws, the most holy book, we do what? Recognize the messenger, and as you say, and then do whatever he says, do the teaching. So to know and to act out that knowledge. All right, to know thee and to worship thee. But let's just deal with knowing thee. Within the compass of 200 pages, this is Shoghi Effendi speaking, Baha'u'llah proclaims unequivocally the existence and oneness of a personal God. That's important, because personal God is a very important connotative meaning. What does it mean to you, to most people in most religions? A personal God, as opposed to, say, a deistic kind of God. Anybody know?
One to whom you can relate.
one that is both concerned with you and to whom, yes, with whom you can communicate directly. One who is as opposed to God as the mechanic who sets the laws of the universe in motion and it goes on as it will. But here again we have God is unknowable and inaccessible. So now we have a paradox. We're supposed to know a being who is unknowable. Now, there is your solution. One of your solutions. There's another one that's even more impressive. What is the solution then? George really stated it when he answered the first question. Implicitly, he did. We know God through the manifestations. So God without the manifestations would be unknowable to us. But because he sends someone who is God expressed in human form, as much as godliness can be expressed in physical terms, the manifestation is God. And that's why Baha'u'llah says in the Igan, if they say I am God in that station of essential unity, they're speaking the truth. There is much about God as you will ever understand. All right? And here you have another clue to resolving this paradox of how we're supposed to know something that is unknowable. All right? What is that? Essence. What does essence mean insofar as you are concerned, or the manifestation is concerned, or insofar as God is concerned? Because we say God is essentially unknowable. Well, sometimes the word essentially simply means mostly, primarily, basically. But here you can see it's a capital E. It's talking about something else. When we say God is essentially unknowable, what do we mean? The essence of God, what we would say God's soul, which sounds kind of strange, but yes, our own soul is unknowable, Baha'u'llah says. All right? The soul of the manifestation. So spiritual essence, the essence of us is our soul, which we understand ourselves only in as much as it's communicating through our brains to our consciousness, which, as we find out, is the second we die, is distinguished from this mechanism here. This is a transceiver through which the soul, the spirit, the mind, the rational soul communicates with everyone else and with ourselves so long as that mechanism is attached. So the solution is that not only the manifestation, but everything that God has created is a means by which we can know him, if we understand what to look for. And what are we looking for? When we're looking for the signs of God in material reality, we're looking for virtues, attributes, godly things. So what does a stone have to tell you about God? Well, if it's polished, it can show you that you take something crude and rough and make it beautiful. By what? By rubbing it. Well, what would rubbing symbolize? With a human being, for example.
Regularity.
Pardon?
Regularity.
Regularity, what? Conflict. You're rubbing off the rough edges with struggle. What else? Pardon? Work. Determination. Love. All right? Embracing. So in other words, we see just in that simple metaphor we just used, that everything in creation, nothing can be found that doesn't tell us something if we know what to look for about God. So God is not only knowable, but it's anything we know is ultimately about God. Because everything we are about, if we know what its ultimate purpose is telling us something about our Creator. Why? Because God has created this experience for us as a classroom, whereby we're supposed to do that. Here's another passage, says essentially the same thing. Every created thing in the whole universe is a door leading to his knowledge. The essence, now, this is the most profound statement, one of the most profound statements about to resolve this problem that you can find in the writings. This is just a glorious statement. What this says is that the essence of belief in divine unity consisteth in regarding him who is the manifestation of God and him who is the invisible, the inaccessible, the unknowable essence as one and the same. Now think about that. That means if you want to know the essence of God, the closest you're going to come to it is by considering the manifestation as exactly the same as that essence. That's the best you can do. By this is meant that whatever pertaineth to the former, that is to the manifestation, all his acts and doings, whatsoever he ordaineth or forbiddeth, should be considered in all their aspects and under all circumstances and without any reservation as identical with the will of God himself. This is the loftiest station to which a true believer in the unity of God can ever hope to attain. So, we've solved one. Do you see the idea now? The idea is this, that when you see something that seems to contradict it, something else in the writings, that it's your job to figure out why it doesn't. And so I can remember my whole life as a Baha'i, 55 years, was going from one question to another that seemed curious or strange or out of kilter with what I expected. No, why does he say that? Or I don't understand. Why would Baha'u'llah do this or say this? And so it's sort of like every stage of my development and my understanding of the faith, I can sort of list all the questions that I needed answers to. And sometimes I would wait and ask people that I knew had studied the writings for a long time. And that was partially helpful. But there's something else you need to know, and that is when you get this information that I have put together for you, it may be helpful for you. But there's an analogy I use a lot when I talk. If a teacher is teaching you math and says, all right, 5 plus 3 equals 8, I want everybody to memorize that. And the class memorizes that. Now, if you ever come across that, you'll know the answer. Now, that's useless, isn't it? Mostly useless, unless you're on Jeopardy and they ask you that question. All right? So, what would be useful? What would the teacher do that would be useful in teaching the same thing? How to add, the process. So you don't want units, quanta of information. That will stand you only in so good a set. So, I mean, you can say, oh, that was interesting. I learned that tonight. I'm going to jot it down. And it's mine. But it's much more valuable when you do this yourself, when you learn the tools of how to do it. And so if we can, that's what we're about tonight, is for me to sort of share with you some of the ways you go about doing this process, rather than me saying, I'm going to show you 10 exciting paradoxes. Well, I'm going to, if we have time. But the fact is that what's important, what I'm trying to show you is how to solve them when you come across them, because there are a lot more than 10, all right? All right, let me switch, if I can do it, to a now I have to switch glasses. Scientific method, we've already talked about that. We've reached the end of the document, it says. And let's go back to the beginning of the document. Human uniqueness. Okay, that's not what I want. Let me see what I want here. All right, this is one more passage in regard to what we were talking about the essence of a spiritual thing is essentially unknowable. Its essence can't be known. Here's where we have a passage in the writing that, now you're not seeing what I'm seeing. Well, let me go back to the PowerPoint then. Oh, Lord of the computer. What's going on here?
Hold on. You're accessing.
Oh, I'm accessing the wrong thing here. All right, let me see. I want the PowerPoint. Here is what I want. Yeah, okay, I'm done. There. Okay. I've shown you this before, those of you who've been here before when I've taught. It's always useful because it can be used a lot of different ways. This is the method by which God teaches us from how spiritual things get translated through the manifestations into the successive revelations. So you have the divine realm, which is non-composite. You have the physical realm, which is composite, and you have the manifestations who are mysterious. Because we have a lot of questions about the manifestations. As you can see, that's roughly the form of the greatest name, which is what the greatest name symbolizes. So the manifestations, as we've often used in the Rui curriculum, are like perfect mirrors that reflect the Holy Spirit perfectly to us in the form of words and example. The text and the example. They are perfect reflections, as we just saw in that passage about the secret of the essence of divine unity. That everything they do, everything they say, is them explaining something to us about God, how God reacts, how God works. Now we get to an analogy that helps us understand that process. And that is, we as parents are taking the spiritual concept of what should be a mostly altruistic endeavor to create autonomous beings that are fruitful, that are loving, not for our benefit if we are good parents, really good parents. We may take some pride in what they do, but not that it redounds to us. And so we are the intermediaries between the spiritual guidance of these children and developing the children into virtuous adults and advancing civilization. So we have the same function as do the manifestations in that regard. So that's kind of a useful analogy. Another way this analogy works is this. We were just talking about it. What is the essence of our reality? It's the soul. Well, Baha'u'llah says the soul is beyond our comprehension and always will be. Because why? It's a spiritual essence. It's non-composite. We can't understand that in this life. All right? So the brain is an intermediary between our essential rational faculty or soul and our brain and body. So this is, in effect, as I say, a transceiver. It takes information in, sends it up here, and sends information down and out here through our hands and our feet and our actions. And when this is no longer functional, then that connection ceases and all of our qualities remain. Okay, here's another one. All right, I'm not going to give you the answers to this one. Major premise. God intends for us to recognize the manifestations so they can teach us. 2, they are intentionally concealed. What's the solution? Pardon? Teaching us how and what are they teaching us?
It's like wrapping a present. If you wrap it, you want to open it more.
All right, but if the present's hidden, you don't know to open it.
Well, it's intentionally concealed. You don't want to like just say, "Hey, I bought you this." You put it inside a box, so there's a little moment of anticipation.
But you have to know that someone's giving you a present and that the present is a present. So you already have to know what you're looking for, right? All right, it's still a good analogy. You're right. That's still a good analogy. Because the fact is that if God said, or if the manifestations say, the Bob said, him whom God will make manifest will appear well, he does say he'll appear in the year 9, doesn't he? But of course he says, but for the benefit of my loved ones, delay revealing yourself into the year 19. And so Baha'u'llah does that, and he reveals himself in Baghdad in 1963 rather than in 53, which would have been the year 9, where he's actually said that God says, begin. So he conceals himself even further. But they're concealed purposefully in the sense that instead of saying he will be in Baghdad in the garden, be there. Of course, the wise men knew where Christ would be because they knew what they were looking for, right? But they are concealed to test us and teach us. But again, take that a step further. What is it teaching us? You said...
To mystify us.
Why? What good is it to mystify someone?
To make them interested in seeking something more than the corporeal.
Very good. That's a good answer. That we must find something that we're looking for that's beyond physical attributes, so that we don't go for someone because they have a fancy mansion or drive a gold Cadillac. Yes?
When you find yourself, it becomes that soul within you. So that's the purpose to pursue. And that's it.
All right. So it becomes, in effect, something you have accomplished on your own rather than something you have inherited or something that's been given to you. What else? Yes?
Thousands of false prophets out there.
Say the false...
Thousands of false prophets.
Thousands of false prophets, all right? Christ said, beware of false prophets, and so on. Yes?
If it's concealed, then we have to find a new way to look for it, which means we have to abandon everything that we're accustomed to.
Very good. Well, we could go on with this, yes?
I thought they are intentionally concealed except to those who are believers. That have made the process to get there.
But notice this. Once they announce who they are, they don't hold back. Christ goes before the Sanhedrin and says who he is. The Bab goes before the council in Tabriz and says, I am the promised one. I am the one whose name you have for 1,000 years invoked. So, and Baha'u'llah writes all of the rulers of the world. Once they are no longer concealed. So it's only discovering them that's hard. And they're still concealed because they're getting letters, the kings and rulers, from a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire. If he's a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire, you have another paradox. And that is, if they have power, if they have all the attributes of God, then they are omniscient and omnipotent. And they can do whatever they want. But they choose not to step down from the cross. All right? The priest at the bottom of the cross, the rabbis tease Christ. You know, if you're the Son of God, if you're the Son of God, if you're the Messiah, step down from the cross if you've got so much power. Christ doesn't do it. Yes?
But His Holiness the Bob did.
He did temporarily, yes, he did. He did. Yeah, and which shows that, as he said, you can't take me now. No power on earth or heaven can stop me from completing this task. It's a wonderful miracle. It's a wonderful proof of just what we're talking about. But what is the one passage we've learned so often in reading the history of the faith that Baha'u'llah says that shows that he could be out of prison any moment he wanted to? We have consented to be bound in chains, that humankind will be free. Consented. In other words, I don't have to do this. In the same way that he could have certainly healed Mirza Mehdi if he wanted to. And Mirza Mehdi said, no, accept this. Yeah, George.
Sorry to keep talking, but in one way he's saying, you think you're doing this to me, but you're not. In another way, these Bible prophecies talk about the day of the Lord coming like a thief in the night. The thief goes to prison. The thief is not welcome in your home. And people rejected Baha'u'llah because they said, oh, he's the thief. So he's saying,
And of course, another meaning of that is the thief doesn't say, I'm going to be robbing your house next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. I'd appreciate it if you weren't there so nobody gets hurt. The thief comes when you don't expect it. And the writings say specifically that Baha'u'llah and the Bab both chose where they would become manifest. And they give the reason for it. And it also, in a passage you're going to see, Baha'u'llah chose the persona. In other words, they choose what persona, what position they're going to be in, the conditions and so forth. It's not by accident. Everything they do has a purpose. Some other delicious paradoxes. I am but a man like you. I am but a leaf in the wind of God. Major premise. Minor premise. If you have seen me, you have seen God. What's the solution? On the one hand, they're saying, I am God. On the other hand, they're saying, I'm just a man like you. Baha'u'llah says, I was asleep upon my couch, or I was like a man asleep upon my couch. All right? Right away, you know that that's symbolic and not literal. Why?
There was no couch.
There was no couch in the Sea of Chal. And that's where this happened. All right? But you also know it because Abdul Baha gives you an authoritative interpretation of what that means. So, how can they be both a man like us and a prophet, and a being that is transcendent to the point where everything they say and do is a way of us understanding something more about God? Everything. 2 stations? I actually said 2. Let's fix that. Well, I won't. It's 2. TWO, folks. I'm sorry. I put this together yesterday. All right. The station of distinction and the station of divine unity. Baha'u'llah spends a lot of time in the Igan talking about these two. If you want to look them up, you look up station of distinction and station of unity, and he explains the difference. Let's see. Okay, here's another paradox for us. If God is just, is he not also logical? If he is logical, is he not also predictable? In other words, if you don't know what's going to happen, but God is logical, should you not be able to figure it out? How can God be but ever forgiving? These are several balled up into one. O friends, help ye the one true God, exalted be his glory, by your goodly deeds, by such conduct and character as shall be acceptable in his sight. I don't know if that's a good one or not. Let me see. Well, it is in this sense. Okay, here's a nice one. God is loving, and God is ever forgiving. It is clear and evident that all men shall, after their physical death, estimate the worth of their deeds and realize all that their hands have wrought. I swear by the day star that shineth above the horizon of divine power, they that are the followers of the one true God shall, the moment they depart out of this life, experience such joy and gladness as would be impossible to describe, while they that live in error shall be seized with such fear and trembling, and shall be filled with such consternation as nothing can exceed. Wow. Now, when you first hear that, that sounds like we got two ways to go. We're going to make it, or we're going to be filled with fear and consternation. Which sounds like a replication of the Christian and Judaic concept of heaven and hell, and the Muslim concept of heaven and hell. Either you make it or you don't. I'm sorry, one more good deed, and you would have had it. But it's over. It's done. You are filled with fear and consternation for eternity, and you are happy for eternity. What's the solution to this? This is a toughie. This is a difficult one. Think about it while I try to find another passage here that I want to. And I know what to look for here. Let me see. I want to find...
Acceptance of suffering.
Hold on, just a sec. All right, here's the answer. See if you can figure it out. Let's read this one together. These souls and symbols of detachment have provided and will continue to provide the supreme moving impulse in the world of being. These are souls who have really been nice. All right? The world beyond is as different from this world as this world is different from that of the child while still in the womb of its mother. When the soul attaineth the presence of God, it will assume the form that befitteth its immortality and is worthy of its celestial habitation. And here's the clincher. Here's the solution not only to this paradox, but to the one we were just talking about. Such an existence is a contingent, not an absolute existence. What does contingent mean? Yes.
It means 1/3 goes to the lawyer.
In something other than legalese, can we have an answer? Contingent. It depends. It's dependent on what happens next. So in other words, the condition with which the emotion you experience as you immediately enter the next world will indeed be dependent on how you've lived your life in this world. But it's a contingent state. It's not absolute or eternal. In other words, you have a chance to improve, to be forgiving. Why? Because God is ever forgiving. When does he stop forgiving? Never. What can he not forgive? Nothing. Well, does that mean it's automatic? No. How do we know that? Well, we look at another passage. All right. Now, another thing this gets at, by the way, is the presence of God. Again, we've already dealt with that one. How do we enter the presence of God? Well, we don't. Not exactly. Free will in the afterlife. You're all familiar with the passage, I'm sure, that this one here, which implies there will be no free will in the afterlife. You take this out of context, share it with your friends, and you'll all feel miserable. Why? The progress of man's spirit in the divine world after the severance of its connection with the body of dust is through the bounty and grace of the Lord alone, or through the intercession and the sincere prayers of other human souls, or through the charities and important good works which are performed in its name. Well, those are the only options. All right? Grace and bounty of God, prayers of others, are good works that someone happens to do in your name, which if you haven't, if you've been a drug dealer or whatever, there's not much chance of that, right? So it sounds like you don't have a prayer, but you do. And that's what this next passage is about, if I can get it here. Now, look at the highlighted part. As here they can receive light by their supplication, their prayer, there also they can plead for forgiveness and receive light through the entreaties and through treaties and in supplications. Through their own prayers and supplications, they can also progress. Now, who are they? Well, look at the first line. It is even possible that the condition of those who have died in sin and unbelief may become changed. So in other words, now we go back to the other paradox. What is it you initially experience? What is appropriate for you to experience according to how you've lived? That's your initial experience. And if you review your life, because Baha'u'llah says you will, upon entering the next world, review how you've done, assess it, and you're going to feel pretty bad if you've done poorly, But it's not either or. If God is able to provide you with a unique life, in other words, no one has ever been you. No one has ever lived exactly the same life that you have lived. No one ever will. You are unique in all of creation. Can you imagine that the afterlife would not also be capable of being tailored to the exigencies of your life? In other words, instead of you get it, you don't get it. Instead of you're miserable, you're ebullient, you're happy. No, you are whatever is appropriate to your particular situation. And your education from that point on will be tailored to your appropriate situation. Why? Because God is that smart. And God is that capable of fashioning an experience just for you. Just as He shaped this experience just for you. And so you can see, even if now, to back that up, of course, we have the passage in the Agdas where Baha'u'llah says what about Mirza Yahya? Mirza Yahya, of course, was the half-brother of Baha'u'llah, who was the most grievous covenant breaker, except for the one who exhorted him to break the covenant, and the Sayyid Muhammad of Isfahan. Now, what does he say about Mirza Yahya that's so important about this in the Agdas? Yes, that if he will sincerely ask for forgiveness, God will forgive him. Now, that forgiveness doesn't mean it's going to be like that. It may be a process. I presume it would be a process if God is a good teacher and we know He's a perfect teacher. And so if you're taking someone who's been recalcitrant, you don't say, don't forget about it. If they said something bad to someone, you'd say, forget about it. Now here we get into something very interesting. I've written a book on. And that's about, are there any sins that are unpardonable? Unpardonable. We've all heard about there's some unpardonable sin. Well, what is an unpardonable sin? Is there any sin that is ultimately unpardonable? No. If he just said to Mirza Yahya, who broke the covenant, you can be forgiven, then any covenant breaker could be. Now, of course, the question is, will he do it? will he say, I see the error of my ways? Because this goes to another paradox. Love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. Know this, O servant. Why is that a paradox? Because God is all powerful, and yet God can't impose his love on you. Why? Because love, by definition, is a reciprocal relationship. And therefore it requires two free wills conjoining. All right? So that means, again, we got free will in the next life. Otherwise, Mirza Yahya couldn't ask for forgiveness, nor could these people here. You can't pray without free will. Otherwise, it's meaningless. I ordain you, I order you to pray for forgiveness and to be apologetic and so on. What meaning does that have? It has none. It's sort of like ordering your children to love you. You know? You can't. You can only make your love available to them unconditionally. But it's up to them to reciprocate so you can have a relationship. Same thing that God is saying when he says, love me that I may love thee. Okay, so any questions or comments on that one? That's a very important one.
You said unpardonable sins is not teaching your children unpardonable?
No, let's put it this way. And this is my own thinking, and there's some things in the writings that support it. When we say something is pardoned, you're a lawyer, you tell me, what does it mean when it says you're pardoned? The governor pardoned you.
That you're guilty, but you're not going to hold it against you.
Not necessarily you're guilty, but what does it mean effectively insofar as the law is concerned?
You're not convicted.
It never happened legally, right? So this is how I accept what is meant by pardon, that it, in effect, yes, you did this, you're aware of it, and now you're ready to move on. So you're pardoned for this. But there are things for which you shouldn't be pardoned, for which you need to dwell on, whether in this life or the next life. There are things you need to think about deeply, to feel remorse, so that you will understand the gravity of what you did. And of course, the most grave way of understanding what you've done, if you've done harm to someone else, which is the greatest harm you can do, is to feel what they feel. So maybe we'd get a taste of that. Who knows? So what sins are unpardonable in the sense that they're not immediately, you're fine, you're ready to move ahead. You see what you did, but none of it's worth your dwelling on. So this is my understanding alone. It's based somewhat on the writings. But you see what I'm seeing, saying how there could be a distinction between those acts you have done where you need to be made aware of the gravity of what you did so that you can improve. All right? So you can go on. As opposed to those that said, you did this, you see you did this, but it wasn't significant enough that you can't be pardoned for it. So unpardonable sins to me would be anything you have done where you need to learn something from it more. That you need to be made aware of it, feel remorse, maybe great remorse. Okay? So we see here that we've already distinguished between what you experience when you immediately pass to the next world and the process that goes on after that. All right? Because this is preparation for something more expansive, not less expansive, where your capacities are greater, not lesser. And that includes every human capacity you have, all right, let's deal with another one. This will be our last one, and I'll just let you go some questions. It's on the thing, but I'm just going to tell it to you so I don't have to try to find it. There are some Baha'is I've heard who are afraid, well, they're not afraid, they just accept it as a fact, that we're not going to have any emotions in the next life. Because after all, your emotions are caused by neurotransmitters going across the synaptic clefts in your brain. And once your synaptic clefts and your neurotransmitters are gone and in the grave, how are you going to feel emotion? What do you say to that? You're all accepting that, eh? And yet the writings clearly talk about, it just said, those who, what you're going to feel, didn't it? As soon as you go to the next world. You're going to feel very good, or you may feel very bad, or you may feel something in between. All right? So how are you going to feel if you can't have emotions? Well, here again, the answer is simply you go back to the brain as intermediary. In other words, the brain is not the source of your emotions. All right? The brain is a transmitter of emotions. The emotion precedes the act of the neurotransmitters, though we also know that while we're hooked up to this thing, it can cause us to feel things that aren't warranted, either depression or all kinds of emotions that the chemicals can get messed up and so on. But once you're severed from this defunct machine, you don't feel these emotions that aren't warranted. I don't know if that's clear or not. But in other words, suffice it to say that the answer to that is, sure, we feel emotions. What would the afterlife be like if you didn't have that essential human capacity to feel emotion? So in other words, when we're talking about what we take with us, we take our reason, our memory, our emotion, our will, everything that's important about you. And of course, here's another paradox. I like this one. This is a silly one. But we talk about, there's this question, I think it's in Lights of Guidance. Are there such things as soulmates? Will I be with my husband? Will I be with my wife? Will I be with my best friend? Will I be able to take my dog? And you want to be husband and wife forever, which no doubt is true that we can be companions with all sorts of friends. But what the idea of husband and wife, why does that seem to sort of dissipate with profundity as we contemplate the next world? What is missing? Huh? No sexual identification. You are a soul. Male soul different from a female soul? No. No. Okay. So that's an interesting thing to contemplate, isn't it? We don't have to worry about sexism or these things that are totally dependent on physical, psychological, sociological determinants. Any questions before we quit? There are all kinds of paradoxes. Enjoy them. Don't fear them. And don't stuff them away inside, because they build up and they cause what? Pardon? Acid reflux is actually a symptom of what they cause. What they cause is doubt, and doubt causes acid reflux, or GERD's disease.